I'm back. We are going to transition into our Torah service at this time. If you will all please rise for the procession of Torah. Whenever the ark was carried forward, Moshe would say, "Arise, Adonai, may your enemies be scattered, may your foes be put to flight before you. From Zion shall come forth the Torah and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Praise be he who in his holiness gave the Torah to his people, Israel." Vayhi so Haron, Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, Yafuzu Oivecha, Yanusu Misanecha, Mifanecha, Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah, Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah, Udevar Adonai, Yerushalayim. Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah, Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah, Le'amor Yisrael B'Kedushato. One thing we also work on is getting the correct responsive on there as well. And also there is a prayer that we typically say following the reading of the Torah, and we don't have that up there, but we'll get that up there also. The only difference here that I can see is the second line that's up there. The congregation says it first, and then the reader says it second. So you will hear that second line sung twice before we go on to the third line. If that makes sense. But we'll get it all fixed to there. Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Vayed. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, ונתן לנו את תורתו. Baruch atah Adonai, notei haTorah. Amen. Praise Adonai, the Exalted One. Praise be Adonai, the Exalted One, throughout all time. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, who rules the universe, choosing us from among all peoples by giving us your Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, who gives the Torah. This version also is not one I'm familiar with, so we'll work on how we do. Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach, Asher natan lanu Yeshua Mashiach, ve'haruch shel habrit hachadesha. Baruch atah Adonai, notei habrit hachadesha. Amen. Praise Hashem. Can you go back one more? Sorry. Praise Hashem, to whom praise is due, who has given us Yeshua Messiah and the words and commandments of the new covenant. Blessed are you, Hashem, who gives the new covenant. Thank you. You may be seated. This first is a reading from Bereshit, from Genesis, the 37th chapter, verses 11 through 17. Vayiknu vo echai vayaviv, shemar et hadavar vayelchu, echai lirot el tzon avachim, bishchem. Vayomer Yisrael et Yosef, halio alecha roim bishchem lecha, ve'esh lechacha alehem, vayomer lo hineni, vayomer lo lech na re'i et Shalom achecha ve'et shalom hatzon v'hashiveni davar vayishlachechu me'imeki Hebron vayavu shemchecham vayimtza'echu ish v'chinei to'e basadeh vayish alechu chayish lemor ma tevakesh vayomer et achai Anochi mevakesh hagida na li efo hem roim vayomer hayish nasu mitzei ki shamati omrim necha dotena vayelech Yosef achar echaiv vayimtzaim bedotan. And his brethren envied him, but his father kept the saying in mind. And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Do not your brothers feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said to him, Here am I. And he said to him, Go now, see whether it is well with your brethren, and well with the flock, and bring me back word. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What are you seeking? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, where are they feeding the flock? And the man said, They are departed that way, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dotan. And Yosef went after his brethren and found them in Dotan. And this next is from a parsha or two ago, but I think it's important to remind us of generations. I like us to think generationally. And when I talk today, it's important to remember where all of these events started, at least in this particular story. This is Romans, the 9th chapter, verses 10 through 13. ולא זול בלבד, אלא גם רבקה, בכויתה הרש לאיוש אחד, ליצחק אבינו. בטרם נולדו בניך, ובטרם עשו טוב או רע. נאמר לה ורב יעבוד שיער. כדי שתיכון תכנית אלוהים, המושתתת על בחירה לו, מתוך מעשים אלא לפי כי רעתו של הקורא, הכתוב, ואוהב את יעקב ואת עשיו שנאתי. Sorry. Nor is that all. Something similar happened to Rebekah when she had conceived children by one husband, our ancestor Isaac, even before they had been born or had done anything good or bad, so that God's purpose of election might continue, not by works but by his call. She was told, "The elder shall serve the younger." As it is written, "I have loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau."
Bluetooth disconnected.
What then are we to say? Is there justice on God's part? By no means, for he says to Moses, "I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion." Vezot HaTorah Asher Sam Moshe Lifnei Bnei Yisrael Adonai Be'ad Moshe. This is the Torah which Moses placed before the children of Israel, with the command of the Lord and by the hand of Moshe. And today we are witnesses to the portions that were read in the Torah and the Brit HaChadashah. Whenever the ark was set down, Moshe would say, "Adonai, may you dwell among the myriad families of your people. Return, Adonai, to your sanctuary, you and your glorious ark. Let your Kohanim be clothed in triumph. Let your faithful sing for joy. For the sake of David, your servant, do not reject your anointed. Precious teaching do I give you. Never forsake my Torah. It is a tree of life for those who hold it, and all who uphold it are to be praised. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are filled with peace. Cause us to return to you, Adonai, and we shall return. Renew our days as of old." Thank you. How many of you read the Parsha this week? I'm going to start giving a quiz at the end. Just kidding. Here. Vayeshev, and he lived. Another original title based on the first couple words in the story of Yosef. It's kind of spread over 4 Torah portions in a row. It's the longest and most tightly scriptive of all stories in all of the Torah. Nothing, I can tell you, is there by accident. Every single detail counts. One moment, however, seemingly glorious, irrelevant, and it is at this moment that contains one of the most beautiful concepts, I think, in all of Torah, in my opinion. Of course, if there is a small moment that's seemingly insignificant somewhere in God's word that often goes unnoticed or passed off as not important, you know by now that that's where my focus is going to go. And I'll probably pick it to death and invent things that aren't there, but maybe not. I like these seemingly innocuous moments in time that have very tremendous insights into God's word, mysteries that we can discover. There are no coincidences when it comes to the things of God. With great speed in this parsha, we are introduced to the broader themes of the whole story. Joseph is envied and hated by his brothers. So deep has this hatred gone that they're no longer able to even speak civilly to one another. Why is this? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but dreams become a big part of it. Joseph was hated by his brothers, but he seemed completely oblivious to their feelings until disaster struck and they turned on him. In Genesis 37, we are painted a picture of Joseph being, well, kind of a bratty teenager, really. Right? This is Genesis 37:2. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to them, to their father. He seemed to be just that kind of punk that you kind of wanted to slap upside the head, right? However, there's more to this situation, I think, than meets the eye. The first thing we need to remember is that these particular brothers who were tattled on were not the sons of Yaakov's legal wives, Leah and Rachel, right? They're the sons of Yaakov's two concubines, Bilhah and Zilpah. No doubt this dynamic, and I'm reading into it here, but I can't imagine that made for easy family life. There's probably a lot of strain and stress on the family at this particular thing. Having said that, it appears that Bilhah and Zilpah underwent a change in their family status that can only be recognized by looking at the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, Bilhah and Zilpah are referred to as ish isha. Okay, that's what the Hebrew says. This is a term that is only applied to a legal wife. Also notice how Jacob refers to Bilhah in verse 10. What is this dream you have had? Do you really expect me, your mother, and your brothers to come and prostrate themselves before you on the ground?
On the ground?
Thank you for demonstrating what that looks like.
Part of the,
Yes, it was.
part of the demonstration.
Did you catch that part? Why is this significant? I'll read it again. What is this dream you have had? Do you really expect me, your mother, and your brothers to come and prostrate ourselves before you on the ground? Remember, Rachel was long dead by the time he said this. Rachel was gone.
Right.
Bilhah was Rachel's handmaiden, and now Jacob is referring to her as Joseph's mother. This is further evidence that Bilhah's status, along with Zilpah, had been elevated to that of a full wife. They're no longer thought of as this second-rate relationship. They're now elevated to the status of full wife. And then there's the little matter of the coat of many colors, right? So what's up with that? Again, it goes without saying that because Yaakov had always favored Rachel, he had also favored the two children that she gave him, Joseph and Benjamin. So as an expression of a special affection that Yaakov felt for his firstborn son from Rachel, he gave Joseph what many English translations render as a coat. You know what's coming, right? That's not an accurate translation. The Hebrew is ketonet pasim, which literally translates as royal tunic or majestic robe. It was as if Yaakov had anointed Yosef to be a ruling prince over his brothers. The scriptures tell us that the brothers were so angry that they hated him, quote, and could not speak peaceably to him. From the Hebrew cultural perspective, this means that their rage was fuming to the extent that they could not even offer up the typical shalom of greeting to him. So they sort of communicated at this point by dark glances at each other, right? They're not even on speaking terms. And then Joseph had a series of dreams that involved his family. This is Genesis 37, 5 through 8. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. Why do you suppose he decided to share this dream with them? At best, I think he showed probably a lack of tact, right? Surely he knew how much his brothers hated to hear this dream, and it set him above his brothers, so naturally they would. Shall you indeed reign over us? The brothers understood perfectly the meaning of this dream. One day Joseph would reign over them and have dominion over them. Did they hate him for having the dream and believing it was true, or did they actually believe that the dream came from God and would result in their future? Hard to say, right? It is also relevant to this dream, the fact that it involves sheaves of wheat, because his ultimate position of status over his brethren that would come true had much to do with food, as we shall see. And if that dream wasn't enough, it was followed up by a second, when Joseph also decides that it was probably a good idea to share that one with his family. Genesis 37, 9 through 11 says, he had another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is this that you have had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. We have to think that God's purposes will always be fulfilled, and something that on the surface seems to be not just something we have to grin and bear, but something that is dark and something that is painful and something of this nature will always be for the better good, right? What if he had not angered his brothers? What if what came next with him being sold into slavery had not happened? We like to talk about the 300 years of bondage in Egypt, right? But what we forget is the 400 years prior to that that were the Hebrews living in peace with the Egyptians, right? They were given choice lands for their crops, all because of Joseph. And if it hadn't been for being sold into slavery and what happened next, Israel may well not have survived, because they were on the brink of famine. There was no food. If they didn't have the relationship with Egypt through Joseph, what would they have done? Interesting, right? So he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers. If Joseph was unwise in telling the dream, knowing how irritating it would be to his brothers, he was even more wrong sharing the second dream, especially because it set him not only above his brothers, but his father and mother. Joseph seems to be afflicted with some sort of pride that's often present with those who are favored and blessed. He's so focused on how great his dreams are that he does not even begin to consider how it will affect his brothers or the ears of his father. With all these happy thoughts stewing, the brothers have left home to tend their sheep, and Yaakov tells Joseph to go and see how they're faring. We can only speculate as to why he wanted his son to go and check up on his brothers, as it were. This encounter would set in motion the central drama of everything that follows, this pivotal moment when his brothers sold him into slavery. This is the moment that would lead eventually to their bondage in Egypt, the Exodus, the wanderings, the giving of the Torah that would change the course of human history forever by formally establishing a people and a covenant. But it near that small moment that I like to pick apart and probably isn't really there. Yosef arrived at Shechem, where he expected to find his brothers shepherding the sheep. That's where they go. This is where they do this, right? And they're not there. They're nowhere to be found. He might as well have wandered around for a while, and then when he couldn't find him, he could have returned home. But it just so happened that none of the events that take place, if that had occurred, would take place in the way that they did. Think about that for a minute. The entire story about to be revealed is based on a tiny little thing that seemingly doesn't matter. This is what it says. A man found Yosef, and behold, he was wandering in a field, and the man asked him, "What are you looking for?" He said, "I'm looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock." Then the man said, "They have moved from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Yosef went after his brothers and found them there. I know of no other comparable passage in all of the Torah. 3 verses dedicated to an apparently trivial, eminently forgettable detail of someone having to ask a stranger for directions. Have you ever had to ask someone you didn't know for directions? Probably. Did it change the course of human history?
No.
Probably not. Why is that detail included? Does it matter? Couldn't it just said, and he went looking for his brothers, and then he found them shepherding the sheep in Dothan? Why this stranger that we don't know, that he has to ask directions? Who was this man? And what message does the episode hold for future generations, for us? The anonymous man, so the Torah is intimating, represented God coming down and redirecting things, pointing Joseph in a direction he should be going and not where he was going, so that the rest of this whole story can unfold. He didn't know that. I'm sure Joseph wasn't aware that this man came to tell him something that was so important. He had no way of knowing the significance of that meeting. I believe that there are times in our lives when we feel lost, only to find someone saying or doing something that lifts us or points us in an entirely new direction, a new destination. And it may take many, many years before we can look back and see how important that interaction was. Hindsight is transformative. Leonardo da Vinci saw things that other people don't see. I'm sure you're familiar with the paintings such as the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, but he did many more things in his life than paint. He was an architect, he was a sculptor, he designed revolutionary weaponry, he drew sketches of a flying machine that 500 years later we would recognize as a helicopter. He practically invented the science of anatomy. On one occasion, he spoke about vision. He said that there are 3 classes of people: those who see when they are shown, and those who do not see. We catch a glimpse of this story of Yeshua as he walked with his disciples on that fateful Sukkot when they saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? They assumed that it had to be one or the other. If a person was blind or lame or a leper, they must have done something wrong. Thus was the prevailing thinking of the first century world of Yeshua. If there was disease present, it was a direct result of sin. There's always a punishment for sin. Or it might be a punishment for the sin of the parents. But Yeshua answered like this: neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's work might be revealed in him. Interesting. He went on to say, I am the light of the world. He healed the blind man. Yeshua spat and rubbed kind of mud salve in his eyes. This is what he spread upon the eyes of this man who had no sight. A story is told of a preacher in a revival where after one of the services, a woman new to the church began a tirade where she unloaded upon him all of the horrible things that had happened in life over the course of many decades. Abuse and abandonment, family disputes, illnesses, accidents, and deaths. When she finally had reached the end of her long complaining session, he asked her, "Have you ever gone at night under a myriad of stars and poured all of this out to God?" She looked at him indignantly and answered, "Oh, preacher, there are some things that you just don't tell God." What this poor woman really needed to see was that the Son of God, down on his knees, spitting in the dirt. If Yeshua truly is the living Word, the very God who became flesh and dwelled among us, if this incarnate Word could bend down in the dust and spit in the dirt and smear it on the eyes of one scorned and broken and shunned by society, if Yeshua could live that close to his people, can't we trust him with everything? Sometimes our eyes are closed, but our hearts are open. And sometimes it's the reverse. I read a story once about a woman who boarded a bus early in the morning in the heart of New York City. She had worked her shift as a nurse in a hospital for the past 16 hours straight. Things had not gone too well. A doctor had berated her for something that she did not do. Her children had called nearly every hour to complain about something wrong happening at home. 2 of her patients had died. Her feet and legs ached from standing for so many hours. And now she was forced to stand again as no one was willing to give up their seat for her to sit on the long bus ride back to her tired, worn-down neighborhood in the rough part of town where she rented a small apartment and barely made ends meet. She was exhausted, discouraged, and feeling very bitter toward God. She was in a foul mood, and nothing was going to change that. It was at that very moment that she heard a deep and kindly voice from somewhere near the front of the bus. "My," the voice said, "isn't it such a magnificent day? God is good, and he has blessed us with the joy of his creation." She could not see the man to whom the voice belonged, but he maintained a steady stream of commentary as the bus wound its way through the crowded streets. He spoke of the spring flowers, the beautiful church windows, the children playing without care in small patches of grass, and the sun as it warmed him through the window, the sounds of life all around. The woman sat there in astonishment as something started to change on the bus as this man spoke. Little by little, people began to glance up from their newspapers and their phones. They began to look out the windows. They began to sit up a little straighter, and there was a little bit of lightening to their careworn faces. They began to smile. When at last they had arrived at the woman's stop, she walked down the aisle and finally caught a glimpse of this man who had become their self-appointed guide. He was a plump, bearded man wearing dark glasses and carrying a white cane with red painted at the bottom. As she stepped off the bus, all of her built-up tensions faded away. God had sent a man who could scarcely see to help her and the others see. When all seemed dark and oppressive, there, in the soft light of the morning, the joy of God's beautiful creation. How often we walk through life with our eyes open but our hearts closed. How often we sit, even across from one another at a meal, seeing only our glowing phone screens or newspapers or whatever it is in that moment that distracts us from those that we love. We miss the glory of God's creation all around us. We fail to see the small, seemingly insignificant moments in our lives where the Holy One sends angels disguised to remind us of his goodness and direct the way that we should be going. All too often we have eyes, but we do not see. We have ears, but we do not hear. God is always in our midst, but too often we try to face this troubled world utterly alone, never availing ourselves to God's presence and his love and his tender mercies. We lose sight of his grace. Yeshua came into the world to open our eyes. He came to bring us back to the Father and to his word. He came to remind us of truths that the world says are lies and that we take for granted or forsake altogether. Only when our eyes and our hearts are open will we see God in our midst. He is there in the big things as well as in the small. He is there in the kindness of a stranger and the healing of the broken. He is there in the stillness, and he is there in the clamor of a million sounds all around us every day. He is there in the ugly and the hopeless. As we shall see in the story of Joseph over the coming weeks, and his amazing life, God is ever our hope and our salvation. And that's all I have to say. Are there any thoughts, comments, questions?
Got a joke?
Do I have a joke?
Yeah, there was a joke in the middle of this.
Okay, I have a joke, but I mess this one up all the time, and some of you have heard it. I'll try not. It's because it involves numbers, and very small numbers, but my brain doesn't do numbers. So, okay, so there's a plane, small plane flying.
Yeah, I did this one.
Did I do this one?
You just did this one last few weeks ago, didn't you?
I don't remember.
Facebook guys up there, right? In the airplane.
Yeah, I didn't. Not to everybody. Okay, there's an airplane flying, small plane, one pilot, and 3 passengers. One is the Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
Did I tell this one?
Yeah.
Just a couple of you. I don't think everyone.
You can tell it again. It won't be the same joke.
That's right. It'll be different. One is the Dalai Lama. One is a very young, newly ordained rabbi, and one is Mark Zuckerberg. Right? Those are the passengers. All of a sudden, there's some turbulence, and the pilot gets on the intercom and he says, "I have some terrible news. The plane is going to crash." And it gets worse because there's 4 of us, but there are only 3 parachutes. And I'm taking one of them. And he jumps out. So now they're sitting there looking at each other. And first one to speak is Mark Zuckerberg. And he says, "Listen, I have made more contributions than anybody in 1,000 generations. I'm the smartest man in the world, and I'm taking one of these parachutes." And he jumps out. So now there are 2 people left, but only 1 parachute. And the Dalai Lama says, "Look, I'm old. My whole life is about peace. I'm all about going with the flow of whatever life brings my way. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Why don't you take the last parachute and go, and I'll go down with the plane?" And the rabbi says, "Look, I don't even know why we're talking about this because the smartest man in the world just jumped out of the plane with my backpack." There you go. There you go.
I have Sean's reviews.
Okay, Sean's views, please.
This is from Sean. Are you seeking my kingdom or the kingdom of this world? My kingdom is filled with love, joy, peace. The world's kingdom is filled with chaos, selfishness, deceitfulness. Seeking my kingdom with all your heart is what I want for you. The world tells you only its kingdom will give you all you want or need. My kingdom is created for you. I have prepared a place for you there. You have a place at my table. Don't fall into the false sense of the world's kingdom. There is nothing preparing for you and no real place set up for you. There is only a snare for you when you put your trust and faith in me and seek my kingdom. Wait a minute. Prepared for you and no real place set up for you. It's only a snare to you when you put your trust and faith in me and seek my kingdom. I'll show you how much I and the Father love you with blessings that you never thought possible. It's what the Father and I want for you. It's what we desire for you. Come to me, share your thoughts and prayers to me, and I will be here listening to you, praying for you. Give yourself to me, and I will be with you always. That is the first one. He had a good day. How are you living for your peace? Are you seeking this world for your peace or my presence for peace? This world tells you that peace can only be found in the material, but I tell you that your peace can only be found in me and my word. As your only direction to a real peace, your life is my peace. will take care of you in times of trial. This world's peace will take you to a sense of false peace. Listen to my voice, seek my presence, as I will give you my peace in handling this world. Stay obedient to my word, follow my ways, and there is nothing you will fear or worry. Seek the kingdom, for in it this is of righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. You will keep in perfect peace if you stay steadfast in your mind with putting your trust and faith in me and the Father. Focus on us. We are always with you. Our love is always in you.
Okay, for this next bit, we're going to turn off the live stream. So, a number of you have been asking me if I hear from Glenn, and if I hear from Glenn, what does he say, and so forth and so on. So, we'd heard little bits and pieces of, the visits he's made to his children and grandchildren, and kind of his struggles with some health issues that he's been having.